Afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this month's edition of the Mortarstone webinar. My name is Tim Dietrich, and I'm Director of Professional Services at Mortarstone, and it's my pleasure to be your host today. For those of you who are attending, we are recording the webinar, and post-call, you will receive an email that will have a copy of the recording and additional information about how to access Dr. James' the Biblical Fundraiser book series. And so we're very excited about that. Dr. James is going to be doing a presentation today. We do want to encourage you to put your questions in either the Q&A or the chat features of Zoom. We will, at the conclusion of the webinar, be able to address some of your questions. And you may not be aware of this, but Dr. James has granted us an additional hour following the webinar to be able to answer questions. So if your time allows, we would love to have you be a part of that ongoing discussion. So without further ado, it's my pleasure today to introduce my good friend and mentor, Dr. Russell James. Dr. James directs the graduate program for charitable financial planning at Texas Tech University. And if you want to read paragraphs and paragraphs from his background and his publications and his research, we're going to let you do that via Google. But Russell, I was thinking earlier today, it's been about 3 years since we have started working together, and it has been a real pleasure. For those of you who have received our 2023 and 2024 generosity report, Dr. James was one of our cheerleaders going into that research project, and he has been a wonderful outside counsel to us as we continue to make that report stronger and more robust year after year. Dr. James, it's a pleasure to have you today. Before we get launched into the core of the presentation, take a moment, please, and just bring everybody up to speed on the Biblical Fundraiser, because I don't assume that everybody is familiar with that work. So we'll get to more detail about how to get to that at the end of the webinar, but please take a minute and just tell us about the Biblical Fundraiser as a book.
Sure. So just letting folks know, if you have interest, the Biblical Fundraiser series, the first book is called The Biblical Fundraiser in Modern Practice, Helping Christians Enjoy Their Wealth. The second one is The Biblical Fundraiser in Ancient Words, the historical ministry of major gifts fundraising, more of a deep dive technical exegesis for folks that are into that sort of thing. And then the third book is just a real short Bible study, just a series of questions and some pieces to think about to accompany those questions called Joyful Wealth Management. Now, those are all free, and one of the ways, probably the best way you can get it, is just to go to encouragegenerosity.com, and you'll see a bunch of various books on there. And if you look, scroll down to the one that says the Biblical Fundraising Series or Joyful Wealth Management Series, you'll see links to all of those, including the PDFs of the books, slide sets, videos, all that sort of thing. Of course, you can get those on Amazon or Audible if you prefer that, but they don't give those for free. So if you want the free one, you can go to encouragegenerosity.com. That's my website. Get that for free. You can go, if you want the paper version or other versions, you can get those in those typical places.
So I was with you, Russell, on April 16th when we did the formal book launch at the K-Love Studios in Nashville. And we have been real excited on your behalf for this work, and we're excited for you to present today. So Dr. James, without further ado, please share with us your presentation today.
Great. Thanks so much. Well, I am definitely looking forward to being able to share with you a bit today about on the real practical side of things. Some of you may have seen the kind of an interview overview or an overview of biblical fundraising. This is a little bit more into the nitty-gritty of it. We're going to be looking specifically at how to have biblical wealth conversations that inspire major gifts of assets. So we're going to look at scripture. We're also going to look at science, and then we're just going to get very practical on what sentences can we use to accomplish these things. So first, I want to start with a little bit of data. I am a researcher, a professor, so I'm fascinated by the data as well as the deep dive on scripture. And so I want to ask this question from a data perspective. What is it that is missing from fundraising at churches and Christian organizations? And when I say missing, we want to see what is missing in the data. And so we're going to start with data from normal charities. So these are not churches, these are just typical charities in the US. So this is data from 12,394 fundraising organizations. So what does charitable giving at normal nonprofits in the US look like? Well, it looks kind of like this. Normally, the top 0.3% of donors provide about half of the money, around 51 to 52%. Now, that's what fundraising charities normally experience. What would charitable giving look like if we went in and just removed most all of those big donations? Well, it would look a bit like that chart on the right-hand side. Now, why am I showing you that chart on the right-hand side? Well, because that's what charitable giving to churches in the US looks like. Remember, normally that top 0.3% of donors provide just over half of the money, but in churches, that same group of donors provides only 14.4% of the money. Even the top 1% of church donors provide only 19.6% of gift income. We can see that those big gifts are missing from the church space. Now, I want to share a little bit more data with you, and this is looking at not just churches, this is looking at any kind of religious organization. And this data comes from the IRS. This is showing what people do in their estate plans. And first, let me give you the good news. The good news on the left-hand side is that as wealth increases, the likelihood that someone is going to include a gift to a church or other religious organization goes up and up and up. But now let me share with you the rest of the story, and that is the right-hand side. As wealth increases, even though the likelihood of including a religious nonprofit goes up, the share of charitable dollars that go to religious nonprofits, well, that goes down and down and down. So what explains this? Well, it's the same answer for both of these trends. What explains it is that churches and religious organizations are good at getting small gifts. They're just really bad at getting the large ones. In fact, they're even good at getting small gifts from wealthy donors, but they're bad at getting large gifts from wealthy donors. So what's missing? Well, it's not that wealthy people aren't Christian. In fact, the majority of millionaires in the world are Christian. It's not that wealthy Christians don't make large gifts. They just don't make them to the church and sometimes not even to religious organizations. These large gifts are missing. And I want to suggest to you something else is also missing. And that is the missing ministry of major gift fundraising. This is the ministry that is specifically described in 1 Timothy 6:17 through 19. It is a scriptural ministry focused on the wealth holders, those who are the accumulators of wealth. This is a ministry that's often missing from the church. In the church, we love to have all sorts of ministries for all sorts of special groups. But it seems one group doesn't feel really comfortable, and that is having a ministry to those who are rich. I like to call it the offensive ministry. It is a scriptural ministry focused on the wealth holders. It's about wealth sharing by wealth holders. It's about asset sharing. Now, notice this is not about income sharing. Income sharing is wonderful, love it, support it. That is not what this passage or this ministry are talking about. This is a conversation about assets and asset sharing. It is wealth sharing, not income sharing. What do I mean this is the offensive ministry? Well, let's take the typical ministry. We might have a conversation like this. Hi, I'm Bob. I'm the new youth minister. You're the what? The youth minister. I'll be working with the young people in our church. I'll also be working on programs to reach out to other young believers in the community to minister to them as well. Nothing unusual about that conversation. Now, let's make it offensive. Hi, I'm Bob. I'm the new minister to the rich. You're the what? The minister to the rich. I'll be working with the rich people in our church. I'll also be working on programs to reach out to other rich believers in the community to minister to them as well. Ooh, I don't know. That feels a little bit uncomfortable. I'm not sure we should do that. Now, first, let me say, before we get into this, that Paul and James actually match. James warns against breaking community based upon wealth differences. The passage in James 2 through 4, warns against making distinctions. Literally, this means to separate throughout or wholly. Now, James is saying, do not break the community based upon wealth differences. Paul's special ministry to the wealthy focuses on this same issue from the opposite direction. That is, it focuses on bringing the rich into community through their sharing. Now, the word here for the fellowship community in the church is the koinonia. And when Paul is describing the sharing that is done, he uses the word koinonikos. This is koinonia sharing. This is a message about bringing the rich into the fellowship community to bind them more closely together with the fellowship community. It exactly matches the same goal that James has when he says, if they are in the church, don't you dare break apart that fellowship community. We need to pull them into a community with the fellowship, that is the koinonia. So one of the things I want to point out about this passage is that this is a little bit different. It's different in a few ways. There are, of course, many passages in the Bible written to the giver. This one is written to the one whose ministry is to encourage generosity in others. In other words, it is written to the fundraiser. Paul is outlining for Timothy the scriptural ministry of major gift fundraising. In fact, the Voice translation begins this with the phrase, here's what you say. He is training Timothy on major gift fundraising. And I want you to know something very important about this passage, and that is this is not a passage that has anything to do with income or income sharing. This biblical fundraising immediately talks about the donor's wealth. It's one sentence in the Greek, but it has 7 references to accumulated wealth. These are not income words. These are not high income words. These are words for the accumulation. Now, this is different than ordinary fundraising that fears these wealth conversations and tends to stay stuck in the realm of disposable income decisions. Again, income sharing is wonderful. That's not what this passage is talking about. And here's where you need to understand the difference. Wealth is different, not only in its definition, but also in its form. Wealth is rarely held in money. It is rarely held in cash. Wealth is held in appreciated assets. Wealth sharing is not money sharing, it's asset sharing. The story of wealth is the story of appreciated assets. If we look at financial assets held by families, and here we're going to actually exclude all of their wealth that's held in real estate and just look at financial assets, less than 3% of that household wealth is held in cash, checking account, money market accounts, and similar. Everything else is held in stocks, bonds, retirement accounts, life insurance, mutual funds. It's held in what we call non-cash assets. Wealth is appreciated assets. Now, this is important to understand because for most people, they will only think of their giving as a disposable income decision. And the commits to the very first gift from their wealth rather than from their disposable income can be transformational for the donor. And what we see in the data bears that out. The single biggest transformation you can make with a donor who already cares about your cause is to get them to consider their wealth, not just their disposable income, as donation relevant. In fact, I did a study of over 1 million nonprofit tax returns over a 6-year period to answer the question of what predicts current and long-term fundraising success. And let me share with you what that answer was by giving you a little bit of data. We were looking here at the 5-year growth in total fundraising for two different kinds of organizations. On the left-hand side, we have organizations that receive only gifts of cash, both at the beginning and at the end of the 5-year period. On the right-hand side, we see organizations that both at the beginning and at the end also receive gifts of securities, that is, asset gifts. Now, notice the cash-only organizations in total, at the end of that 5-year period, their total contributions had grown only 11% combined. Now, that's the same as the combined inflation rate over that same period of time. However, the nonprofit organizations that also were including gifts of securities, both at the beginning and at the end, their combined growth rate was 6 times greater. This is not some small temporary difference. This is a 6-fold increase in long-term contributions growth just by knowing that one factor: were they at the beginning raising any money from assets, not just cash? We also see that in how people's behavior changes once they commit to a gift from their assets, from their wealth. And indeed, the first time most people will ever commit to a gift from their wealth is when they do that in their estate plan. And what you're looking at here from a law review article looking at nationally representative data is what happens to people's current giving after they put charity into an estate plan. These are actually the same people on the left in the white bars before they added charity to their estate plan, and on the right in the black bars after those same people added charity into their estate plan. We see on average a 77% spike in their charitable giving that is sustained 2 years, 4, 6, even 8 years later. So estate planning gift is one thing we know about it. It is not income sharing. That is sharing wealth. And indeed, that is a bit like how Paul begins this conversation about wealth management just a few verses earlier, mentioning, "For we have brought nothing into the world, so we cannot take anything out of it either." I also want to point out that this missing ministry causes not just a financial issue, but also a spiritual issue. Church financial stewardship is interesting because it teaches one half of stewardship, but not the other half. What do I mean by that? Well, I want you to think about in the New Testament, what does it mean to be a bad steward? There are, in fact, two kinds of bad stewards in the New Testament. There is the binging bad steward and the burying bad steward. Now, church financial stewardship is almost exclusively focused on preventing the binging bad steward. That is, don't spend more than you have coming in, don't abuse credit cards, various issues like that. But Jesus actually told more stories about the burying bad steward than he did about the binging bad steward. And here's the thing: income sharing conversations do not help with the spiritual issue of the binging bad steward. Suppose a person is being that burying bad steward. They've been richly blessed with wealth, and their plan is to bury it and die with it. And then, well, then explain to the one who blessed them with that why they did that. Now, let's suppose we have a heart-to-heart conversation with this person and we convince them to share 10% of their income. Wait, let's make it even better. Let's say we convince them to share 30% or even 50% of their income. That's wonderful. And how does that affect their buried wealth? Very simply, it doesn't. It, if anything, simply slows the rate of additional accumulation of their buried wealth. Income sharing conversations don't address this spiritual stewardship issue. And we see it not only in this passage, but we see it throughout the New Testament. Hey, we know how to share donor stories. Donor stories are powerful and inspirational. But you know what we see in a lot of the New Testament? Not just donor stories, we see asset donor stories. We see wealth sharing examples. Notice in Acts 2:45, and they would sell their property, katamata, and possessions, huparexes, and share them with all. Or from Acts 4:35, from time to time, those who owned land, chorion, or houses, oikion, sold them, brought the money from the sales, and put it at the apostles' feet. Notice we've got four different asset donor stories, four different asset giving examples. In fact, we can look at some more. How about this from Acts 4:36 through 37? Now, Joseph, a Levite of Cyprian birth, who was also called Barnabas by the apostles, which translated means sons of encouragement, owned a tract of land. We get yet another reference. This one is to Agru. So he sold it and brought the money and laid it at the apostles' feet. So here we get a gift of an asset, a donor story, where we actually get the donor's name. We can get even more strong. We can get a donor story that has the donor's name, the donor's asset, and the fair market value of the asset. Mary of Bethany came with an alabaster vial of very expensive perfume of pure nard. She broke the vial and poured the perfume over his head. This perfume could have been sold for over 300 denarii. She has done a good work, Kalon ergon for me, is Jesus's response. Now, I point out that phrase because that good work that Mary of Bethany did, that's the exact same phrase we see in this passage about encouraging major gifts of assets when it says to be rich in good works. That is the exact same phrase describing what Mary of Bethany did with her major asset gift, good works. So the suggestion is if we want to follow the scriptural pattern, we don't just tell donor stories, we tell asset donor stories, and we tell them about all different kinds of assets. Notice in scripture the variety of asset descriptions that are used in these donor stories. It's asset number one, asset number two, asset number three, asset number four, asset number five, asset number six. This is not income sharing. This is wealth sharing. It is asset sharing. Now, there are professional associations that are focused on these kinds of conversations, focused on major gifts of assets, complex gifts of assets, also called in some places planned giving. And I speak at those conferences regularly across the country. There are fundraisers from every kind of nonprofit at those conferences except one. There are no local churches. There are no stewardship ministers. There are no executive pastors. The other fundraisers are very interested in having asset conversations. It's only the churches that aren't. Now, I know that what I'm about to talk to you about, talking to wealth holders about their wealth and wealth sharing, having asset conversations, can be scary. You can feel like I'm not comfortable talking to wealth holders about their wealth. I don't know anything about wealth, wealth management, or assets. I don't know about all of these things like capital gains taxes, closely held stock, real estate trust, private foundations, charitable remainder trust, charitable lead trust, or estate planning. So if you have any of those feelings, let me point out a couple of things that might be helpful. First, learning new things is required whenever you reach out to any new people group. Remember, we're not called only to minister to those who are like us. We are often called to minister to those who are very much not like us. And that includes this scriptural ministry to the wealth holders. Hey, if you're interested in all the technical aspects, that learning is actually free. If you go to encouragegenerosity.com, you will see those links, or you can also get the direct links to the video series there that goes through all of gifts of assets, what we call planned giving. As well, as has already been mentioned, if you just connect with me on LinkedIn, I will send you links to all of those videos, all of those books. This is a scriptural ministry, and it is missing from the churches. We can see that in the data. The economic consequences of this ministry being missing from the churches are devastating. So are the spiritual consequences. I want to encourage you today to fix this, to take the time to add in this missing ministry, because the impact of it, both in those you are ministering to, the wealth holders, and those that they can impact, will be enormous. So let's get into the details of how to do this. And I'm going to start with this idea of what actually works in fundraising. The secret to major gifts is understanding that major gifts are gifts of wealth, that is, asset gifts, not disposable income. And we need to begin with this fundamental understanding that wealth is not income. Wealth rarely comes from a paycheck. Wealth comes from owning assets that go up in value. Wealth is appreciated assets. Now, people may buy those assets with inheritance or borrowings or savings from income, but then they either pick the right assets, that's usually involves some risk, or they'll use personal effort to increase the asset value, which oftentimes they will do both of these things. This is actually where wealth comes from, whether we're talking about Bill Gates, Warren Buffett, or your neighbor. Wealth comes from owning assets that go up in value. If we're talking about most middle class wealth, it comes from borrowing money, we call it a mortgage, to buy an asset, we call it a house, that goes up in value. If it is Bill Gates, he created a company and then he used personal effort to increase the value of that asset. Warren Buffett invented a new way to borrow money to buy stocks, and then, well, he picked the right stocks. This is how wealth is built. This is what wealth looks like. So, I am a professor. That means my favorite thing to do is to give exams. Last week was our final exams at Texas Tech University. Sadly, I'm not allowed to fail any of you, but I want you to think about what your answer would be to this. And hopefully, you remembered from just a few slides ago that less than 3% of household wealth is held in cash, checking accounts, money market deposit accounts, or similar. In the fundraising space, especially in the church space, there is a tendency to try to fight over this narrowest, tiny little segment and ignore everything else. It's almost like everybody is gathered around a kiddie pool that's sitting at a beach, and everybody is fighting to get a leg in that same little kiddie pool, but nobody will turn and look at the ocean right next to it where there is a massive amount of opportunity. Also, keep in mind that this is a psychological difference. Gift size, what feels appropriate, is relative to the money category. Asking for cash is asking from the small bucket. Asking for appreciated assets is asking from the big bucket. Large gifts are made possible by large reference points. Now, we can see this in experiments. In this one, the only people were simply walking into a grocery store and asked if they wanted to participate in an experiment. Some people were asked, "What's in your wallet or purse? Do you have any cash or credit cards?" Others were instead asked, "Do you own any stocks, bonds, certificates of deposit?" Just being asked those questions immediately changed their behavior because now they were thinking of their wealth, and on average, they spent 36% more at their shopping trip. Now, we're not so much interested in people's shopping, but we are interested in motivating their giving. And it turns out that if we want to motivate big gifts, well, we need to be asking from a big category. Think of it this way. Which gift is more valuable to your organization? A $10,000 check or $10,000 of stock shares? Now, if you talk to the CFO, he or she might say, "Oh, we just want the cash. That's way simpler. I don't want to have to deal with the stock shares." One gift is more hassle for the nonprofit, but it actually costs the donor less. They get a double tax benefit when they do that. However, there's another reason why we should prefer the gift of assets, and that is because it is a gift of wealth sharing. And once a donor's wealth or any category of the donor's wealth becomes relevant, that can permanently transform their giving from that point forward. A checking account, that's where disposable income lives. Appreciated assets, that's where wealth lives. So we really do want to get those gifts that are asset gifts. This comes from a concept called mental accounting. Let me switch that, sorry. In story, people put labels on money and then they treat the dollars differently based upon those labels. When a new category of money becomes donation relevant, giving increases. Think of it this way. What about the first time you ever made a gift of, let's say, household furniture or extra clothing to a charity shop? Maybe you were moving or redecorating. From that point forward, what comes to mind when you face that same situation again? The charitable option comes to mind. In the same way, after the first time that a donor makes a gift of assets, and realizes that capital gains taxes, oh, wow, those were optional. They now know whenever they are facing that next realization event that we have some charitable options and that the asset options start with the charitable solutions. So how do we get started on this? We start by listening. An upcoming sale, retirement, inheritance, those are all times for charitable planning. Be a resource. I help our donors give smarter. How? We can share a story about someone making a gift of an asset, getting that double tax benefit. We share stories. We already know how to share donor stories. Why not share donor stories that include stocks, bonds, real estate, or businesses? The point is that mindset matters. Gifts from disposable income stay small. Once a donor begins to think of donations as something that comes from wealth, things can change dramatically. So now I want to shift from statistics to story and ask the story question, is this the land of wealth sharing? I often talk about telling stories about the donor and the donor's impact. But for major gifts, we also need the right setting. The major gift question is this the land of wealth sharing? You see, in story, setting matters. It creates expectations, it defines appropriate behaviors. Hey, are we in a fantasy realm? Then we are open to fantasy events. Are we in the Old West? Well, then we expect Old West things. The major gift setting is, are we in the land of wealth sharing? Typical, normal, everyday gifts, those are gifts of disposable income. Major life investment gifts are not. They are gifts of wealth. So how do we establish the setting? We want to get donors to talk about their wealth, their businesses or investments. This can encourage generosity, it can reveal capacity, it can reveal plans to buy or sell, acquire or retire, which create opportunities for creative solutions. Now, in the universal hero story, a guiding sage will help the hero to complete that heroic journey. Now, for the donor story, the donor is the prospective hero on that journey to potentially make that impact. The guiding sage comes along to give advice, planning, guidance, introduce that prospective hero to friends and allies, provide a magical instrument or weapon that helps that prospective hero to complete his or her hero's journey. Now, I mention this because the fundraiser in the donor's hero story can play that same role. The fundraiser gives advice, planning, and guidance. Again, can introduce the hero to or prospective hero to friends and allies, perhaps technical experts or past donors. Provide a magical instrument or weapon of impact, such as a gift instrument or a gift agreement. Now, how does this story concept match up with Scripture? Well, what we see in this passage is actually includes a description of the relationship, the ministry relationship with the wealth holder. The word translated here as instruct is actually a compound word. It combines both para, to come alongside, and angele, the authorized message, of course, from the word angel. Biblical fundraising comes alongside para, the wealthy, in a sincere relationship of ministry to deliver an authorized message, an angele, about generosity. So instruct, parengale, in a military context can be translated as command. In your own ministry context, that's likely not what matches. And indeed, in his own fundraising appeal, Paul writes, I am not saying this as a command. Ordinary fundraising doesn't do this. It either begs from below or attacks the wealthy from above, or simply avoids the wealthy because that feels uncomfortable. Begging from below, that pairs with almsgiving. That is small gifts. Eleumosune, that's the word for this kind of giving in the New Testament. We don't see any usage of eleumosune or almsgiving in this passage, or indeed in any of the New Testament after the book of Acts. Advising, coming alongside to deliver an authorized message about creating good works and sharing, that's what pairs with major life investment gifts. That is the right relationship for this particular ministry. So in fundraising, we talk about this role. And how do we execute that role? Well, we use questions. Socratic inquiry can reveal what fits each donor's specific journey. For major gifts, the guiding sage fundraiser, as part of that, needs to talk about wealth. That is, they need to talk about assets. So let's talk about wealth. Why? Well, not only because that is the scriptural example that we see for this ministry, which has 7 references to wealth in one sentence, but also because of its practical power. It creates a setting of wealth sharing. It uncovers capacity for a major gift. It reveals opportunities for creative solutions. It leads to the next meeting that shares these creative options. There are all sorts of opportunities for creative solutions. Now, I teach 2 semester-long courses, graduate courses on the law and tax aspects of all of these plans. But again, let me just say, whatever the donor's situation, you've heard the phrase, there's an app for that. Well, there's a charitable plan for that. If the donor is planning to sell an appreciated asset, or if they're not planning to sell appreciated stocks, or they're getting ready to retire, or they're taking retirement account distributions, maybe they've got a big income spike. Maybe they can't use tax deductions at all. Maybe they have kids who don't want to take over the farm or the vacation home. Maybe they have estate tax issues. Maybe their wealth is all tied up in liquid assets. None of those are a problem. We've got solutions for all of them. And critically, we want to get to the next meeting that shares these creative options. How do we do that? Well, we can begin simply by starting social and then following up. How do we have these conversations? How about something simple like, how's business? Or especially in these last few months, how's the market been treating you? The magic comes from the follow-up questions. These show shared interest and reveal opportunity to provide advice. What are we trying to do with these conversations? We're trying to elicit the asset story. Assets have stories. They have a past, a present, and a future. And if we can uncover this asset story, it leads to charitable planning conversations. Let's look at an example of how we can lead the donor through their past, present, and future asset story. The past. Let's begin with something simple like, what's the story of your business? How did you get started? The present. What are you most excited about at the current time? Then we move to the future. What are your future plans for your business? Here's the reality. Regardless of the situation, there's only two options for that asset. They're either going to sell it or they're going to die with it. Both of those create great opportunities for charitable conversations. Let's suppose their future plan is the sale or transfer of that asset. Ask about it. What will that mean to you? Have you thought about using the sale or transition of your business as an opportunity to achieve some of your charitable goals in addition to your financial goals? Now, if they're not going to sell it, that means they're going to bury it and die with it. Ask about that. Will your heirs continue running the business? I know there are some smart ways to avoid taxes for people like you who want to include a gift to charity in their plans. Have you ever thought about that? The end of the past, present, future asset story matches exactly with the start of our conversation in 1 Timothy 6. Paul opens his conversation on wealth by pointing out the end of the story. For we have brought nothing into the world, so we cannot take anything out of it either. Moving us towards the core wealth message, don't bury it and die with it. That's foolish. Instead, enjoy it by using it to do good, to be rich in beautiful good works. Hey, you can start this conversation with any kind of an asset. Are you a collector? Art, stamps, coins, etc.? What's the story? How did you get started? Do you invest in real estate? How did you get started? Where do you vacation? Do you own a home there? How's the market been treating you? What's your investment philosophy? What's the best investment you ever made? Tell me that story. The story progresses from past to present to the charitable future. Have you ever considered making gifts with assets instead of cash? Or many donors giving at your level use appreciated assets instead of cash because they get a double tax benefit. Have you ever considered giving in that way? We can move from the why questions to the how questions. Why questions are important. Those uncover connections to the donor's close people, personal values, and life history. The how questions actually lead to wealth conversations. You've done so much for this organization. What allows you to be so generous? Or how are you able to make this wonderful gift? That then leads to other conversations. Have you ever given something other than cash to a charitable organization? Are you ever planning to sell something that is worth more than you paid for it? We can even begin these conversations with what I call reverse questions. That is a statement that's going to trigger a question. For example, if somebody asks, "What do you do at the organization?" Well, I help donors give smarter. How do you do that? That gives you permission to share a story. Or I help people give weird assets to this organization. That's then going to trigger a question. What's the weirdest asset someone has given? Both of those give you permission to share a story. Your story is going to be one where your advice helps someone like the donor. They're going to give an asset instead of cash, and it's going to end with a question. For example, if it's a story about a weird asset, have you ever made any unusual investments? If it's a story about how you help donors to give smarter, after the asset story, we ask about, have you ever been hit with capital gains taxes? And then, regardless of their answer, we want to make the follow-up questions. For example, have you ever made any unusual investments? If they say yes, ask about it. Has it gone up in value? If they say no, ask about it. Oh, so do you like stocks or bonds or something else? Or if we ask, have you ever been hit with capital gains taxes? Maybe they say yes. Ask about it. Oh, that must mean you were good at investing. Tell me what happened. If they say no, ask about it. Oh, that's smart. It's good to avoid those as long as you can. Do you think it might be a problem in the future? So the point is not that there is any magic phrase or magic way to get into the conversation about assets and asset sharing. Use whatever is most comfortable for you to start having asset conversations with donors. Asset conversations are wealth sharing conversations, not income sharing conversations. So pick what is comfortable for you or come up with your own way to be able to start having asset conversations. Um, Now, one of the realities is they can also signal that they don't own any appreciated assets, and that's helpful to know as well because likely they are not in this ministry category of to the wealth holders, to the rich, if they don't hold non-cash assets. Now, all of these paths are leading to the same destination, and that is the request for a meeting to share options. So it might sound something like this. This reminds me of another donor's situation. I remember he used some creative planning that avoided taxes, created income, provided for family, and made a big impact at the organization. Would you mind if I talk to some of our experts and put together a few ideas for you to look at? And folks, if there's anybody on the call who's saying, I don't know any experts, I don't have, well, I think you know some people at Mortarstone, and they can either be your experts or get you in contact with the experts. If you've got an interesting asset to do some charitable planning with, there are some really cool options for that. I know a lot of folks might be thinking, yeah, this feels uncomfortable. These conversations require talking about wealth. The first thing I would suggest to you is to think of the conversation as a social goal, not a financial goal. Look, if I were to tell you that your job was to build relationships with people at an upcoming Star Trek convention, how might you get ready for that? Well, maybe you should learn a little bit about Star Trek. Not because you like it, but because it's what the other person cares about. Building and managing wealth is a big part of the lives of wealth holders. So it's important to learn a little bit about this to be able to have these conversations. But what is perhaps even more important is to understand the right destination. The right destination in having these initial asset conversations is to get permission to share valuable options at the next meeting. We can fear these financial conversations because we have the wrong destination in mind. The idea is, oh, I don't want to start talking about assets. They're going to ask me some hyper technical tax related question, and I'll have to pass some CPA exam on the fly. Wrong, wrong, wrong. If you get some hyper technical question, that is wonderful. That is yet another reason why we want to set up a meeting that I can talk with some of our expert folks, put together some options for you to look at, see what may be of interest, and make sure that your questions get answered with all of the best options. The goal is not to give the right answer. The goal is to get permission to share valuable options at the next meeting. Again, something like this. You remind me of another donor. He was in a similar situation. I remember he used some creative planning. It avoided taxes and helped him make a big impact. Would you mind if I put together some ideas for you to look at? We're having asset conversations about the future of this asset and asset sharing. We also show that people like the donor have done things like this before. We lead with value. We ask permission to share even more value. So when we go back to the scripture, it helps to reset our mind that we are actually not in, to use modern language, major gift fundraising. We are in the ministry of wealth enjoyment. We help rich people enjoy their wealth through all of the different means that are described here in detail. And we can talk about that detail during the question and answer session coming after this if you have interest. So the point is, we are here to help. This is the ministry of wealth enjoyment. This is how you can have the most fun with your wealth. Don't bury it and die with it. Let's have conversations about what your future plans are. The right destination is to get the next meeting. Creating this, by the way, keeps that initial conversation social. Not going to make any asks at that conversation, gives you time to reach out to build creative options, and it makes those options feel more valuable. Perhaps most important, it gets the donor to begin thinking about that asset, their charitable goals, that asset, their charitable goals. They're spending time in the land of wealth sharing. And frankly, an epic scene when you present all of these wonderful options requires a bit of buildup. So we want to have some time to pass before you deliver that perfect weapon to help the prospective hero complete their philanthropic impact journey. Expertise can help. It can increase the ability to spot issues, but we don't want to be quick with the right answer. Again, the goal is to get the next meeting. If you get a hyper-technical question, wonderful. Hey, I want to talk with some of my technical folks first. That way you'll get all the best options. But I know there are some attractive possibilities here. Yet another reason to have that next meeting. Now, suppose it doesn't go well. You think you see an opportunity for that asset, but you later find out there isn't a solution. Hey, folks, if you've got the next meeting, you can still present other powerful options dealing with other appreciated assets. And even if you do make a presentation of all of these asset giving plans, or perhaps an asset giving plan, and the donor says no, you've still shared some useful options. You've provided value to them by presenting new ideas and, in a sense, taking that role of coming alongside them to provide some guidance on this. You also need to keep in mind that setting is a place, and that place is the land of wealth sharing, but it's also a time, and that time might not be today. Once we start having these asset conversations, though, we're ready and the donor is ready when the time changes. Maybe that's when an investment or business is about to be sold. Maybe when they're engaged in their estate planning or a new project at the organization arises. Asking about gifts of assets lays the groundwork for these future events. We can use a gift menu in conversation. I help donors like you give smarter. Usually this involves gifts of stocks, real estate, businesses, life insurance, or retirement accounts. The tax benefits can be much larger. Have you ever considered giving other types of gifts like these? Any of them you'd be interested in knowing more about? We can do this on a menu in a survey, response card, website. Check the box or click to receive information about how to save taxes with gifts of stocks or bonds, top tax tips for gifts of real estate, tax smart giving from a retirement account. All of these let you know they have the asset and they're thinking about doing something charitable with it. We want to have those conversations. In the same way that we use a laundry list in a conversation or in a menu, well, that is exactly what we see in the laundry list from the New Testament, where these gifts of assets, we just get example after example after example after example of the variety of assets in the donor stories. We can also ask for opinions. Hey, we've noticed that other organizations receive more of their gifts from stocks and real estate. We're trying to figure out why. Do you mind if I ask a few questions about your thoughts on that? And if so, then we can ask for opinions. What's the likelihood you would ever consider making any of these these asset gifts? We can also change the setting after the gift decision. I like this story from Chirian Koshi. He says, I had a donor on the phone. He said, I'm going to send you a check for $2,000. I said, Jim, is there any chance you have stock that's worth $2,000? He said, yes, absolutely, but I don't want to sell that stock. I said, take the cash, go buy that exact same stock, then send us the old shares worth $2,000. Now you have stepped up basis. That highly appreciated stock now starts at zero for capital gains tax purposes. And you get the charitable deduction as well. He asked, I can do that? I said, yeah. The next day, we received a stock gift of $10,000 from the donor. Notice he didn't ask for a gift of a different size. He asked for a gift of a different type. He began having a wealth conversation, and the gift size increased by fivefold automatically. We can even change the setting after the estate gift decision. If you plan to leave something to charity in your estate plan, could I share with you a way to make sure that the best assets are used for the gift to minimize the loss in taxes? We can change the setting after a pledge decision. I can't thank you enough for this tremendous commitment to our charity. When I come back to finalize the details of how you want to allocate the gift, I'll bring a colleague who specializes in putting gifts to maximize the tax benefits to you. Well, that is the concept, and the idea makes sense. The execution, however, can be daunting. As Chirian puts it, you intervene in a process and stop and say, "No, I don't want your cash." Well, don't say that, but he says, "I know that's scary, folks. I get it, but this is what we need to do." What this really means is being the donor's helper in this conversation. We move beyond cash to help the donor. We take on more administrative hassle to help the donor. We provide advice, guidance, wisdom, counsel as the donor's guiding sage, as someone who comes alongside. Well, folks, I hope some of this has been of interest. As I mentioned, all my books, slide decks, and videos are all free. Just connect with me on LinkedIn, Russell James at Texas Tech, or go to encouragegenerosity.com. So now we get an opportunity to talk about what you think. What ideas connect for you? What do you like or not like about the approach? Why? Anything, you can just type that into the chat or the Q&A. Whatever comes to mind, questions, comments, thoughts, snide remarks, calls to burn the heretic, whatever is of interest to you. I am interested in that feedback. I'll go ahead and stop the share here, and I'll turn it back over to Tim for just a moment. So go ahead.
Well, Russell, the good news today is there are no calls as of yet to burn the heretic.
Oh,
So
sad to hear that.
we can we can rejoice in that. So Mark asks a great question. What resources would you suggest a church have access to, uh, such as CPAs, CFPs, attorneys, to facilitate a detailed asset or wealth conversation?
Yeah, so one of the things to keep in mind is don't assume that just because somebody is a CPA or a CFA or CFP, that they are familiar with the world of charitable planning. So it can be helpful, but again, not everybody in that space is going to be familiar with those things. So I do think that it is helpful to have a little bit of to have a little bit of knowledge yourself. Like, take the time to learn some of these fundamental concepts. And again, it's all free. And I know that for many people, it's like, I don't want to learn that. I didn't go to seminary to have to learn these things. Look, I would put it this way. Treat this like any other people group. Let's suppose I told you you are going to have a ministry to reach out to prisoners. Do you think it would make sense for you to learn a little bit about prison life first? Would it be appropriate for you to say, I don't want to learn about prison life. I'm never going to be a prisoner. No, you learn about it because that's what's important to those in your people group. So I think it's really important to take a little bit of time to learn about these issues of wealth and wealth management that are important to your people group. And that means take a little bit of time to learn some of the basic options, the basic opportunities in asset planning. And again, it's all free, right? Look, literally, if you either YouTube Russell James Plan Giving, or you go to encouragegenerosity.com, the link's there. These are short, kind of animated videos, about 15 to 20 minutes a piece. If you just watch one a day, there's 65 of them, but one a day, give it 2 to 3 months, and you'll be familiar with kind of the whole world of charitable planning. Now, I think that's important. At that point, if you have a donor and they've got an asset, and then they have sorts of, different kinds of questions and that sort of thing, the time to contact Those, maybe they're within your local church, or maybe you're reaching out to experts and consultants, whether that's Tim, or he can get you in contact with other people who know that. That's the time to then reach out. And say, but if you're working with the person in your local church, make sure you ask them, if it's say a CFP or a CPA, hey, I've got a scenario with charitable planning, and I'm thinking that I want to have a conversation with somebody about. Is this an area that you have expertise in? Is this an area that you work in? So don't assume that, oh, well, they're a financial advisor, they'll know all this stuff. Don't assume that, right? You need to educate yourself so that you at least know if they're in that space or not.
So, so is there, I know, Russell, that you have a lot of, in this, you kind of are leaning into one of my questions. Um, in terms of somebody that wants to learn, you would recommend that they seek those free resources, for example, what you have mentioned there, and that would help them maybe kind of get up and running. I've had a couple of questions about what a development director job description for the local church might look like or include. And whether or not this has to be a paid position, or is it possible that that person could be a lay leader? Say, for example, I've got someone in my church who is a CPA or a tax attorney, just as an example of maybe a high capacity volunteer to do that.
Yeah. So again, ministry is ministry. Get paid, not get paid. It's the same ministry, right? So, and the ministry steps are the same. So the question of the job description. So there's actually a kind of a deep dive word study on this question in the Biblical Fundraiser book series, because believe it or not, Paul actually deals with this because he is going to send Titus to the church as a fundraiser. And in fact, he's explicit about that Titus was the one that got him started, and I'm sending him to you so that you can complete this work. So he's explicit that Titus is a fundraiser. And he actually gives a description on what are you supposed to call Titus, right? Like, how do we introduce Titus the fundraiser at a party? And the interesting use of the language there is that he describes Titus as his fellow worker, who is being sent for your benefit. So the notion is, number one, this fundraiser, which is, by the way, terrible language. It started around the turn of the century in the 1900s. It just means money getter. That doesn't tell us anything about the ministry. But this fundraiser role, number one, is someone who works closely with the ministry leader. So that's important for donors to know they have this direct access through the fundraiser to the ministry leader. And what is that person's role? That person's role is to help you, to further what are your own goals, what you want to accomplish philanthropically. So the idea of saying, hey, I help our donors give smarter, that notion of my job is to help donors. I like the phrase help donors give smarter because that can include the tax side of things, but it can also include the conversations about what impact do they want to have with their wealth and with what God has blessed them with, right? So that is this role of the donor's helper, right? I help our donors give smarter. I work closely with the ministry leader to help our donors accomplish their goals. That phrase gets about as close as you can to the Greek language that's actually used when Paul says, what do you call Titus? When he's coming there as a fundraiser. Lots of different flavors of that, but that's the general idea, that we are there to help the donor. Yes, there's going to be some spin-off benefits for our ministries. Some of the ways that they will choose to do good, to be rich in good works, will involve our ministry, and that's great. But our primary role is a ministry role to the, in this case, the high capacity donor, that is the wealth holder.
Okay, related to this idea of the advisors, what would be some just basic things that church leaders need to know about conflict of interest? Say, for example, I'm a pastor and I want to do something for the givers in my church, and I have an attorney in my church who offers a free, wills and trust workshop, and then exchange, he gathers all those names and begins to solicit business. What are some conflicts of interest, maybe some best practices that we just need to avoid?
Yeah, honestly, Tim, those are things that tend to be, if you're talking about an attorney, those tend to be very highly regulated and managed by the attorneys themselves. So, for example, generally the attorney is going to represent the client, which is going to be that person in the conversation. If the attorney is actually employed by the church, and they're working with the client, they would have to disclose that. There would actually have to be a consent to that sort of joint representation. And so if we're dealing with a lawyer, those are very heavily regulated. If you're dealing with somebody who sells products, that can be a different scenario. So do be aware of that, that may not be the best approach if somebody is not there in the role of I'm here to advise people, but if they're actually in the role of I'm here to sell financial products, that might be less comfortable.
So, Russell, think about what you've taught today. And again, we've been very heavily biblical. But in terms of just the approach of going for gifts of wealth versus gifts of income sharing, how far behind is the church with hospitals, universities, environmental causes in terms of this kind of approach to philanthropic fundraising?
Yeah, Tim, you've really pointed to something that is kind of so motivational to me because we see very explicitly in scripture this message of the having wealth conversations, of specifically having a ministry that is just for the wealth holders, to those who have accumulated wealth in this present world or at this opportune moment. And the only organizations that aren't doing this are the churches, even though it's actually very explicit in scripture that we ought to be doing this. And so it is frustrating because Tim, I speak to lots of major gifts fundraising conferences, organizations, but I will tell you, as I try to communicate with even those in fundraising in the church space, it is so frustrating that they seem to be so massively focused on income sharing that they can't ever move beyond that. And again, income sharing is wonderful. It is great, supported 100%. But this is indeed the missing ministry because the idea of let's have wealth conversations about wealth sharing, it just has 0% activity happening in the church. And that's why we see they don't get the big gifts. The big gifts go to people who are having wealth conversations.
Okay, speaking of conversations, Russell, churches typically tend to be very platform driven. We do the sermon, we do the offering appeal, we might offer a seminar or a workshop, we might do an email or a direct mail blast. Is there a strategic uh, process in terms of this is my top 10% of the givers versus the field? How impacted are those top wealth holders with those broad sweeping appeals? Does it need to be a one-on-one relationship conversation, or tell me about how we get to the impact? Because you continue to talk about those conversations,
Mm-hmm.
and churches don't typically think about conversations unless they're in a capital campaign.
Hmm. So the phrasing that is used here, this is essentially in the passage. The point of the passage is God richly blessed you for the purpose of enjoyment, and then a laundry list of how you engage in that enjoyment. And in English, it's like, oh, to do good, to be rich in good works. Well, those are completely different words. So to do good, that's an intrinsic sort of a good, but it's actually work that accomplishes something. So that means my gift needs to accomplish something. And then that phrase of to be rich in good works, that's a different word. That word means to be rich in beautiful good works, beautiful, visible, noble, inspirational. And the interesting thing about that word is that it is beautiful as a reflection of the donor's inward character. Okay, so this is not just, oh, this is some generic beautiful idea out here. It is actually a beautiful expression of the specific character, we might call it identity, of that donor. It is that ministry process of finding what are those character features, those positive character features of the donor, and helping to grow those specific features of that specific donor's character. How do we help grow that? By providing giving opportunities that will truly be an expression of that donor's specific character. So I would suggest to you, Tim, that that ultimately is a ministry process, and that we treat it just like every other ministry process, which is, yeah, it's fine to do some broad communications and things like that, but the ministry process, it's just nitty gritty, one-on-one, having those conversations, finding out what's important to them, finding out about their values, about their life history, about their close people connections, and how those identity elements can connect with something that's going on at our church or at our organization, to bring those two things together so we can show them, here is something that you could fund, either partially or entirely, that connects in with that, that is a beautiful expression. And indeed, Tim, the idea of, we throw around this English word generosity, but generous in the New Testament, almost every time it appears, not in this passage, but in almost every other passage, it is the notion not necessarily of a big gift. It is literally, it means unfolded, meaning that it is not that what you see is what you get, that it is an accurate reflection of the heart, right? That's what that word means. And so we want to start with the donor's heart. What is important to them? And then we are an expert on our organization. So we can think about which parts of our organization can we connect them with? Can we ask for them to fund it? Can we, help to grow those positive aspects of their character? So I do think ultimately that is a personal one-on-one process, which is one of the reasons why this ministry sort of fits, because if we're dealing with wealth holders and we're having conversations about wealth sharing, these are going to be big gifts, right? These are going to be gifts that are big enough to do something specific, visualizable, compelling.
Tell me about the role of the fundraiser relating to the vision or the projects of the church. You're kind of intimating here a little bit, Russell, that when we make an appeal to a donor, we have a menu of projects that we are trying to see funded versus just this big gift that the church can have total discretionary control over.
Yeah, so a couple of things to keep in mind about that. One thing from an accounting perspective, if we have a church budget, right? And if we have a major donor who says, okay, I would like to cover this specific thing within the church budget, from an accounting perspective, that is identical to unrestricted funds. If you are restricting your giving to an already budgeted item, it is exactly the same economic effect as unrestricted funds. Now, You might have an accountant that says, well, that's a hassle. Why would we go through allowing donors to do that? And there's a very simple answer to that. From a scriptural perspective, our goal is not get the money. Our goal is that we want joyful donors. Do you want donors or do you want joyful donors? If your goal truly is to have a joyful experience, then start with the question of what is the most joyful giving experience that this donor could have? Now, when we think through that, of course, it may be that when we come alongside them as an advisor, the most joyful experience they could have might not be with our organization. It might be to fund some other project. And you know what? That's part of the ministry too. We're there to encourage them to do good, to be rich in good works, to be generous and ready to share. So that can be with other places. But once they recognize that we're not just there to ask, we're there to come alongside with an authorized message as an advisor that applies to all of their wealth and philanthropic goals. Now we change the relationship. We're not just, begging. We're not just always asking. We're there to help them out with all of their charitable goals. Now, having said that, it's clearly going to be more motivational if you've got a church or any organization that has exciting, visualizable giving opportunities, right? That has a vision that says, hey, and so part of that is that so many organizations don't get big gifts because they're not trying to get big gifts. And what I mean by that is if you were to say, okay, a gift of in the realm of, let's say, $1 million or $10 million, what would you do with that? And the answer is just deer in the headlights. Oh, I would figure out something, right? Nobody's ever going to give you a gift for that. That is, that is not any sort of a vision that's going to be compelling, that's going to be joyful, that's going to be exciting. We need to understand that just as we put so much effort into making sure that our worship experience is a joyful, inspiring worship experience, or the message that is delivered on the scripture is an inspiring message, we also need to put just as much effort into thinking through what is the most joyful giving experience for this donor, and is that something that we can be part of? Now, we still maintain a very narrow focus on what we as an organization are doing. We're not going to be all things to all people, right? If somebody wants to do some weird thing, that doesn't mean we're going to do it. Now, how do we resolve that conflict? It's real simple. We're coming alongside them as an advisor for all of their doing good, being rich in good works. So if they want to do some weird project that doesn't fit within our church or our organization, no problem at all. What do? We help them do that. We say, well, that's not what we do, but let me spend some time with some organizations that are in that space and see if I can get you connected with somebody who would do that. Do you understand how that would blow the mind of a donor, that you would actually suggest giving to something else that fits what's in their heart that isn't giving to you? All of a sudden, it's exploded their thought of this person is just here to ask, or maybe they're here to beg, and it changes your role. So that's the idea, that we want to be able to give donors those opportunities. I do think it is very powerful if you can break your budget into pieces and then talk to some of your high capacity donors about entirely funding some part of it, if that is a more joyful experience for them. This is not something we do sort of broadly with, with the normal income sharing kinds of conversations, but with these special opportunities for asset sharing, I think that can be very powerful. And fundamentally, even beyond that, if you have had these kinds of conversations with your high capacity donors and you know what different people care about, even in the planning stages for what is the church going to do next, it is helpful to know how we might be able to align in ways that would be super exciting for this person, or this person would really connect in with that. So I do think that when we're talking about a joyful giving experience, it has to be a giving opportunity that accomplishes something. And I'll tell you, Tim, literally with the phrasing that's used in this passage, to do good, to be rich in good works, both of those use ergon, the Greek word for work, which means a work or worker that accomplishes something. If you are asking for money rather than asking for someone to do good, that happens to cost money, then they are not actually able to fulfill this scriptural command simply by giving money. So you need to present an opportunity where they can accomplish something with their gift. So if you just say, well, I want you to give $10,000 or I want you to give $10,000 of stocks, that is not presenting them with an opportunity to accomplish something, to do good works, to be rich in good works. So I do think we've got to talk about the specific impact of that one donor's major gift of assets.
With high capacity donors, Russell, do we sometimes, or do you think churches are sometimes guilty of assuming that our wealthy people already know this stuff? Why should we help? We just need to make an appeal and they'll figure it out with their advisors. I think sometimes churches may be guilty of that assumption. Is that an unsafe assumption?
Yeah, so the reason that that doesn't work is for a number of reasons. One is simply the power of having these wealth conversations. We're beginning to have wealth conversations, wealth sharing conversations. And so when we're presenting ideas, again, we aren't presenting them as a, hey, you have to do this. It's just, hey, I'm here to help, right? Here's an idea. Here's an idea. Now, it is possible, let's say, that a donor would respond to that by saying, oh, yeah, I already know that. That's wonderful. But notice something, Tim. We have accomplished something really important even with that donor. And that is that we have shifted their mindset, even if temporarily, into the land of wealth sharing. That as a result of that conversation, if they say, oh, yeah, I know about all the tax benefits of giving assets instead of cash, what are they thinking about? Giving assets instead of cash, right? We are into that wealth sharing conversation. So I wouldn't be afraid of a response that says, yeah, I already know about that. That is fine. That is wonderful. That response is no problem at all. By us presenting these things, we are actually showing that it is our role to throw out good ideas. Sometimes those ideas are going to be about potential projects they could fund. Sometimes those good ideas are going to be about potential tax smart ways that they could give, or all of the. I'm just throwing out ideas for you, right? And so that changes the relationship, because all of a sudden it's not a relationship of I'm here to ask you for money. I'm here to ask you for money. I'm here to ask you for, right? Now it's a relation. Here's an idea. Here's an idea. And even if the response is, oh, yeah, I knew that, that's fine. You've already changed the relationship. You've shifted their mindset into wealth sharing. So, not a problem to get that kind of a response. The problem is when we assume that we shouldn't have wealth conversations because they know more about wealth than we do. Well, they might. It doesn't matter. We still need to have these wealth conversations to shift their mindset.
One of our webinar participants today, Russell, evidently has been reading the book, which is a good news, and kind of pointed out the appreciation for your distinction between eleemosynē and koinonikus. Would you take a minute and just kind of revisit that for us? You touched on it very briefly, but I do
Right.
think it's important.
Well, and it's actually part of the introduction to the first book because it creates so much confusion in the church. not because there is confusion if we were all speaking Greek, but because it causes confusion in the English translation. And that is, in the New Testament, there are two very different words for giving. One word is eleemosune. That is almsgiving. That is giving down. That is, so for example, in Acts, when the beggar at is asking for alms, that is eleemosune. When Jesus talks about don't let the left hand know what the right hand is doing, that's eleemosune, right? So it's actually really important to follow Jesus's instructions on that, because if you do giving down, if you do almsgiving wrong, it can actually take away honor and social credibility from the person who is receiving the gift. So that needs to be completely hidden. Now, on the other hand, when it comes to koinonia sharing, now this is what Jesus would have referred to as good works, which are supposed to be visible so that everybody can see them, so that they can, give honor to your God, right? There was no koinonia sharing before the church, because the koinonia is in the church age. But after the book of Acts, there's actually no more references to eleemosune. All of the references are to koinonia sharing. And one of the things about koinonia sharing, which is sharing across, not giving down to the outsider, it's sharing across within with the brother or sister. It's actually mutual sharing. So both of them are together sharing from what they have, is that it is massively public. It is, to the point where Paul even got one group that said that, well, we think we'll do something for your project, Paul. And he went and he blabbed that to the entire region next door to the Macedonians. And then he came back and said, hey, you said you were going to do something that really inspired the Macedonians to give. And I'm bringing, I might bring some of them with me. And man, wouldn't that be embarrassing for you if you didn't deliver publicly? And the phrase there is, in the face of the churches. Show them the proof, right? Publicly to deliver on this gift that would be so humiliating for you. You talk about donor publicity. That is some crazy extreme donor publicity. But look, it's not a contradiction to say, oh, but Jesus said, don't let the left hand know what the right hand is. That's eleemosune. That's not koinonia sharing. Look, ministry donors, we've always known who they were. It's always been public, whether that is Phoebe, or I read you the passage there from Barnabas, we get kind of example after example of the named donors, the women in the New Testament that were supporting Jesus. We know the names and the backgrounds of three of them, right? And so again, it is sometimes the approach is, well, let's merge these two concepts together, right? No. Just like the Old Testament, different gifts have different rules. Don't mix and match those rules. And so that is, for those who are interested in that, we start out with that in the introduction to the book, and then later on do a bit of a deeper dive into the difference between koinonia sharing and eleemosune, or almsgiving.
If a person is kind of being parachute dropped into a church, and their new role is stewardship pastor, generosity pastor, minister to the wealthy, how important would it be for the entire staff team, including the senior leader, to really be up to speed on just the basic blocking and tackling of a major gifts ministry to the wealthy?
So I think it's useful for them to at least understand that this is a scripturally commanded ministry. It's something that we're supposed to be doing. Beyond that, I think the very first thing that is important to understand is, what is our goal? Our goal is to have donors who have a joyful experience in their giving. That just as much as we work together as a staff to make sure that they have an inspirational, maybe joyful experience in the worship service, we're going to do the same thing when it comes to donors giving. There is, unfortunately, this tendency only in the church space which I think is reflected in the data, in why the giving is just been going down for 30 years and why there's no big gifts there. To approach giving by saying, well, the problem is our donors need to be better people. And if they were better people, then the giving would just take care of itself. Now, think about any other minister that did that with any other area. If they came out with, our music service is going to be all 12 verses of A Mighty Fortress is Our God, which I'm going to lead in monotone. And if you don't like it, it means that you need to be a better person, because if you were a better Christian, you would appreciate that more, right? We don't do that in any other area of ministry, right? We shouldn't be doing it here. The idea is we want to construct an experience that is going to deliver what God wants. Does God want money? No, he wants joyful donors who are having this experience, this emotional experience with joy and love. Because frankly, if they're giving just because, oh, I'm supposed to give, okay, here, and there's no love, there's no joy in that, Paul tells us what that's worth, even if you give away every dime you have, right? Even if you're the widow giving the widow's mite and it's all you have, if you're not having that emotional experience, love and joy, Paul is like, that doesn't do a thing. That's not what we're going for. We're not going for donors, we're going for joyful donors. So that is something that I think needs to be understood sort of across, is what are we trying to deliver? And what we're trying to deliver is a certain kind of an emotional experience with the giving. And how can we best deliver that emotional experience for this person in this circumstance is what this ministry is all about.
Russell, you've been doing major gift fundraising in the university setting and obviously teaching this across America for a minute. Um, Thinking about your context, not the church context,
Okay.
but your context, and you have a need for a 7 or 8 figure gift,
Mm-hmm.
million, $10 million. How many contacts or conversations would you estimate that it would take I mean, you don't know this person at
Mm-hmm.
all, a total
Right.
stranger, to the culmination of a 7 or 8 figure gift?
So what we see in research is that among those who are already donors, so we're not talking about somebody we don't know at all, right? But those who are already donors, that the typical time between, so what we might call the time between when we first start having conversations that ultimately are going to lead to one of these major life investment gifts, that typical time process is about 18 months. It's about a year and a half. And we're going to be talking. So, what happens in the middle of that space? I mean, obviously, part of that is eliciting what's important to the donor. It's also getting them connected with those areas of the ministry, or those areas of the nonprofit, to kind of see the need, see the connection. But having conversations about, just sort of in the theoretical. Oftentimes, this is done in the context of a campaign, with simply the asking those initial theoretical questions, where we ask about, about what range do you think you might decide to support this kind of a project in, right? So just some of these preliminary things before we get ultimately to that specific ask for a specific amount that does something specific. It's typically about 18 months. Now, the evidence shows that if you take less time than that, you're usually reducing the amount of the gift. So if you're trying to do that in, say, 6 months, that's pretty constricted, right? Whereas if you're looking at a process that's like 24 months, well, you're just dithering at that point, right? This is not being helpful for that. So if you're in that, call it 12 to 18 month space, that's typically the sweet spot for these major life investment gifts. And again, the other thing I would say, Tim, to folks about that idea, because some of them may be thinking, I could never ask somebody for $10 million, right? That's just way, way too scary. What I can tell you, and in a different presentation, I show you all the data for this, is that as a matter of statistics, and I was years as an estate planning attorney, so I can tell you this is a matter of personal stories. If you do not convince that person to share that $10 million gift and make that impact, I can tell you guaranteed what they're going to do with it. They're going to bury it and they're going to die with it. And then they're going to have to explain to the one who richly provided that to them why they did that. Tim, I've read the ending of that story. I don't want that for my donor. I don't want that to be the end of their story. I care too much about them to let that be the end of the story. So yes, am I super comfortable and confident in asking for a $10 million gift? Doesn't make me nervous at all because I know what the plan B is. The plan B is they're going to bury it and they're going to die with it. And because of that, it makes me really comfortable asking for that $10 million gift.
Yeah, I think what you just said, Russell, is really important because I think that sometimes church leaders who have very limited experience in this area, they hear you talk about conversations or they hear me talk about conversations, and they think that's one, maybe two conversations that happen over 30 days. And I just wanted to make sure that they were hearing the relational component, the relational investment that goes into this, because it's not, what you're not saying is, yeah, go sit down with Tim. We know he's got a lot of money. Sit down, get to know him, ask him about how many kids he has and how many puppies he has, and then hit him with the ask. It's
Mm-hmm.
not that at all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's important to keep in mind. And also, the other thing, Tim, this is something you can do super simple is just always be sharing stories or examples of asset gifts, right? I mean, there's no look, what is the New Testament pattern? I just showed you 6 different asset donor words, right? 6 different words for assets that are used in those donor stories. Let's follow that pattern. Let's start sharing examples of giving. And if you say, well, our church has never gotten anything other than cash, that's fine. They don't have to be your donors, right? Just stories that are asset donor stories or stories of asset gifts, right? And so if you don't have your own stories, hey, start with the New Testament. There's some cool asset donor stories in there. But again, the idea of we always want to be sharing about asset giving, following that New Testament pattern. If you want to use an excuse of, hey, here's a way to give smarter, because if you're giving an appreciated asset, you get to avoid capital gains taxes as well as get the tax deduction, assuming you've held it for at least a year. It's a smarter way to give. Well, I've just used the tax thing as an excuse to do what? To share an asset donor story. That's what's following the New Testament example. Asset donation, asset donation, asset donation. Asset gifts are wealth sharing. They're not income sharing.
Russell, I'm going to throw you a curve because
Yes.
you've lived your whole life hitting curveballs. Uh, uh, Let me shift gears on you for just a moment. And this is unrelated to Major Gifts fundraising.
Okay.
But one of the things and as you know, Russell, we work with clients in all 4 time zones who are, trying to really develop a legacy impact ministry. There's a lot of interest in trying to develop end of life or testamentary gifts. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
that's not been a part of our presentation today, but what would you say would be a church's best course of action if they wanted to start building sustainable futures with end of life giving, end of life gifts, bequests, testamentary gifts, whatever word you want to use. So what would be some pieces to that that would be important?
So, Tim, the ultimate goal is to create a culture in the church where people think that people like me make gifts like this. So, how can we get to a place where that is the norm, that is the social norm, that is the cultural norm? Oh, yeah, people like us, we include these gifts and wills, gifts and estate plans. Share stories. That's the first thing. You can, ask people to, let's say, hey, has anybody, let's say we're in a board meeting. Has anybody included a gift in a will or estate plan to the church here? We're trying to collect stories to inspire other people to do that, right? So the idea is we want to share your story, not because we're putting you up on a pedestal. We want to share your story because it can motivate others to make these same kinds of commitments. And then, by the way, since we're at a board meeting here, I notice there's only one or two of you folks that have done this. Actually, you can get online in about 5 minutes. You can name the church as a 10% beneficiary of your IRA account. It's real easy to do. If you would do that, or some other kind of way that you would include an estate gift before we have our next meeting, I think it would be a really inspirational example to others to say that, we've had this many within the leadership that have included a gift, and then to do some interviews. Why did you do that? Tell me why you decided to include a gift in your estate plan. And then we're just always putting that into our regular conversations, regular communication, so that we're, again, in the same way that in the New Testament, 6 different assets, examples that are used there, we're just always staying top of the mind. And the reason that I suggest to do that, Tim, is not only because it's safe, soft, easy, where we can just do this regularly, but also because this is not a one-time event. You see, the reality is that people change their estate plans, create new plans whenever family structure changes or death becomes real. So family structure changes, meaning divorce, widowhood, birth of a first child, birth of a first grandchild, that drives new planning, or death becomes real, negative diagnosis, decline in self-reported health, or people actually approaching the end of life, they do new planning. And here's the thing. If your church doesn't come to the top of the mind, you're going to get left out. Not because they don't like you, they just didn't think about doing it. In fact, there was one experiment where 2,000 people were going through their normal will planning process. Some of them were just asked the standard estate planning questions, where you want your stuff to go. Of that group, 5.7%, or about 5.3% actually, included a gift to charity. Another group got the identical questions except one more. Would you like to include a gift to charity? In that group, it was 10.7% that included a gift to charity in their will documents. What's the point? The point is that these are very fluid decisions. And if you don't stay top of the mind, you're going to get left out just because they didn't happen to think about that. So I would say we just always want to be delivering the message. And so in this quarter, it's, hey, this person's going to say why they included a gift in their estate plan for the organization. And hopefully they'll include something about their life history connection, why this has been important. Next quarter, we're going to have somebody else, somebody older, somebody younger. We're just constantly going to be sharing these stories to say, oh yeah, that's normal. That's what everybody here at our organization or here at our church, that's a normal thing that people do. And so if we're always top of the mind with that message, the donor story message, that is the most powerful. Hey, there's other ways we can do it. We could have a seminar on how to give smarter, and we'll talk about gifts of assets, but then we'll talk about By the way, any of that IRA or 401k money that goes to family, they got to pay income taxes on it. Any of that you designate to go to the church, no taxes on that, right? So now what are we doing? We're talking about estate planning, right? And so we can have seminars that do those sort of things. But the only thing I would caution about seminars is don't look at it as a one-shot deal. We've got to be always top of the mind of mentioning this. Now, why is that super important? You might think, well, it's super important because we want gifts and wills. Well, yes, but not exactly. It's super important because for most people, the first time they will ever commit to a gift from their wealth is when they do that in the estate plan. And we want them to start thinking of their wealth as donation relevant.
Yeah, that's so true. I did a wills and trusts workshop out in the Southwest 2.5 years ago. And 2 weeks ago, one of the participants in the workshop reached out to me and said, "Hey, I need an attorney referral. I'm just now ready to do this, and I want to include the church." So your point about keeping it top of mind and continuing to just make it, I call it normalizing the conversation around non-cash gifts and estate planning, because so many times we just think, yeah, this is going to be the magic bullet and that'll be done and we can move on. So
And
that's
And
an
one of the things I would say about that, Tim, is that your brilliant advice is also about 2,000 years old, because we talked about this relationship as the word is para, come alongside angele with an authorized message. We come alongside the wealth holder with an authorized message. Tim, that is in the Greek present tense, which actually is referencing a constant, nonstop, continual communication. So this is not the aorist where we do it once and we're done. This is the present tense where, man, this is a constant communication that goes on and on and on and on. That's what the scripture says should be done in this space, and it's exactly what you are saying. For folks that went to seminary there, just say, don't do your estate planning in the aorist tense. Do it in the Greek present, your estate planning messages.
that's fantastic. Well, Russell, we are coming up against the top of the hour, but I do want to give you a minute to share anything that has come to mind that you want to share, or maybe a final exhortation to the people who have participated. This is pretty impressive, Russell. We had a really large crowd to start the webinar, and about half of them are still with us coming into the conclusion of hour two. So I think that speaks a lot of the real interest. But do you have a word of encouragement or exhortation for our friends who have stuck with us for the last 2 hours?
Yeah, I would just say when we look at what is in Scripture, what is in the Word, that we see that there is this desperate need for this ministry, and it is misunderstood, right? It's why we're not doing it. There is a lot of misunderstanding about it, but man, if you actually follow what the words say, and you're not just a hearer, but you're a doer of what these words say, it is so powerful to do that. And look, I am whatever format is helpful for you, feel free and reach out to me and say, oh, I want this or I want that, or because I'm trying to build out those resources. Like I said, if you want two 500-page books that do the deep dive exegesis, got that for you for free. If you want just the short Bible study questions to work through with a small group, that's there as well in the Joyful Wealth Management. But I'm in the process of building out those next pieces, things that are helpful for you. So feel free at any point to reach out to me if you run into a barrier, if you run into a snag. Just send me a note, whether you're messaging me on LinkedIn, just Russell James, Texas Tech. They should find me on LinkedIn, or send me an email because I'm there to help. And I want to know what those barriers are that you're running into, because it is frustrating to me to see secular organizations having massive success because they are sort of accidentally, or actually through research, they are doing what Scripture says, and the church is not, and therefore is not getting the big gifts. And that's very frustrating for me. So anything I can do to shift us into having this missing ministry, talking about wealth sharing. I am very interested in helping out any way that I can, and hopefully can be encouraging to you to be in that space, to always be instructing, always be coming alongside the wealth holders with those messages about the ways that you can engage in wealth enjoyment by using it, by putting it to work, by accomplishing something with it.
Well, and Russell, again, thank you so much for your generosity of time today. And alongside Russell, I would just like to say on behalf of Mortarstone, we're here to help too, whether it's through our data analytics or our professional services that help churches with the very things that Russell's talking about. We're here to help. Just reach out to me, and we would love to be able to sit down and talk about what that could possibly look like. In the next coming 3 or 4 months, we've got some great stuff coming, Russell, for our Mortarstone partners. We are going to be looking into donor advised funds. So be looking at a webinar on donor advised funds that'll be coming hopefully by the end of summer. Donor advised funds, Russell, as you know, are the hottest thing right now in philanthropy. And I want to make sure that our churches understand what those are and how to work with them. We're also going to be doing a mid-year report. We are very proud of our last two generosity reports that we've provided, and we are going to be doing a mid-year update. Look for that around July, where we can see maybe the impacts of the election and the economy over the first 6 months of 2025. And then finally, Russell, we're just not going to let you off the hook with writing 3 books. Russell and our team at Mortarstone, we're working together on a special research project on the outliers. We've been identifying in Mortarstone churches that have had year-over-year financial growth of at least 5% in offering revenue over the last 4 years. And we're interviewing those churches to identify the best practices, trying to find those predictive elements. And we're hoping to bring that to you by the fall. And Russell, thank you for your guidance and your help on that project. We're really excited about it, and I think it's going to really move the needle for a lot of our churches. So again, Russell, on behalf of everyone that participated today, thank you so much for being with us. And again, thank you for joining us for the webinar today. Be looking for an email from Mortarstone in the next 24 hours that will include information. Again, the Russell's contact information through LinkedIn, the Encourage Generosity website link where you can access all the materials, as well as a recording of today's webinar. Again, thank you so much, and may God bless you.